Hi, my story today is called Love Online Part 2. It's all about how Lizzie got on with her Tinder boyfriend. I'd love to know what you think about it, so please leave me a comment at the end. If you want to receive more stories, please don't forget to subscribe. Love Online, Part 2, written by Liz Plampton. Lizzie walked along the River Seine, holding Pierre's warm hand. She felt the texture of his skin. It felt very dry and rough, but somehow it made her feel very safe with him. Lizzie felt as if she had known him all her life. She was even beginning to love the sound of his Yorkshire accent. She felt very excited at the prospect of reaching the top of the Eiffel Tower. Not the route any old tourist would take, but in the most unconventional way, via the security staff lift, when there was no one else there. Lizzie couldn't wait to tell Sarah all about it when she got home. Sarah would be so envious, thought Lizzie. By the time they reached the entrance, Lizzie had completely lost track of time. It must be very late, she thought. Lizzie knew the Eiffel Tower didn't close until about 11 p.m, and now it was completely empty. All the crowds of people must have gone home a long time ago, she thought. Pierre led her to a place where the public were not allowed to go. They reached a lift which was for security staff only. Pierre quickly tapped in a 4-digit number on a keypad. That's a coincidence, thought Lizzie, as she watched how deftly his fingers typed in the numbers. That's the same date as my birthday, 2909, the 29th of September. Lizzie began to feel as if everything in her whole life had been leading to this moment. Pierre took her hand and they stepped into the lift. Once inside, Pierre pressed the button and the doors closed. Then, with a sudden rush, they were transported to the very top of the spectacular structure. Lizzie looked up at Pierre, into his dark eyes. For a split second, she saw an unease in his face. He looked away quickly. He must be feeling nervous, thought Lizzie. The lift door opened. Pierre dropped her hand and stepped out onto the platform. Lizzie suddenly felt apprehensive, nervous about what might happen. She tried to dismiss the thought, telling herself not to be so silly. After all, Sarah would never feel like this. She would enjoy every moment. With this thought, Lizzie followed Pierre onto the viewing platform. As she looked out into the night, she could see the whole of Paris. The view was spectacular. She could see for miles. All the lights were twinkling in the distance. She could see the River Seine and a river boat travelling along with its bright lights. She noticed some traffic on the main roads into Paris and bright neon lights still on over the shops. She looked up at the sky. It was filled with stars. There's a full moon tonight, she thought. How romantic. Lizzie looked over at Pierre. He was standing quite a distance away and looked a little uneasy, she thought. He hadn't said a word since they stepped out of the lift. She smiled at him, trying to hide her thoughts. You okay? Said Lizzie. Yeah, I'm fine, said Pierre. Lizzie tried not to read too much into his behaviour, although she could not help feeling there was something wrong. She walked over to Pierre and put her arms round him to hug him. She felt his whole body stiffen, as if he didn't want her near him. Lizzie stepped away. She suddenly felt anxious, but tried not to show it, as she looked out across the sprawling city of Paris. There was a long silence. This was not what Lizzie had imagined at all. Pierre seemed distant and cold-hearted. His mood had completely changed. He even looked different. Instead of his strong, muscular physique that Lizzie had been attracted to, he seemed to have developed a hunch. He would be more at home in Notre Dame, thought Lizzie, except she could see there was not much left of it now, since that terrible fire. He remained still and kept staring out at the view with his hands in his pockets. She looked down at his boots. They were black leather with thick rubber soles and a heavy metal badge on the front. Then she noticed his super skinny jeans, which emphasised his super skinny legs. Not a pretty sight, thought Lizzie. She tried desperately to dismiss these negative thoughts, but they just wouldn't go away. What on earth had she got herself into? She was beginning to panic now. She turned to Pierre. "I think I want to go now, if you don't mind." "Already?" said Pierre. "We've only just started." What does he mean by that? Thought Lizzie. Started? Started what? "Don't go yet. I've brought us a drink," said Pierre. With that, Pierre took out a silver hip flask from his inside pocket. "Here you are," he said. "What is it?" said Lizzie suspiciously. "Whiskey," said Pierre. "I always carry some. Warms you up. Gets a bit cold up here at night." He passed Lizzie the flask. She didn't really want any, but she felt it would be rude to say no. She took a sip. As she swallowed, she could feel the thick liquid burning her throat. She coughed uncontrollably. She had only ever drunk whiskey once before, and it didn't taste like that. "It's a whiskey mac," said Pierre, laughing. "Whiskey and ginger wine." Lizzie could feel a strange sensation in her chest as the whiskey slowly travelled down to her stomach. She passed the flask back to Pierre, thinking he would like some too. But he screwed the lid on tightly and put it back in his pocket. Pierre moved closer to her. He was smiling now. Lizzie felt a little relieved and began to relax a little. She looked at Pierre. His face seemed to blur, and his expression was changing from a smile to a smirk. Lizzie felt frightened and confused. Then she felt her knees go weak. She could no longer control herself. Her knees gave way, and she began to sink slowly onto the platform. She tried to hold on to Pierre to stop herself from falling, but Pierre just stood there motionless, watching her as she collapsed helplessly to the ground. Lizzie was aware of herself lying on the ground, unable to move, and Pierre standing over her, watching her. "Help me," groaned Lizzie, but there was no reply. Lizzie closed her eyes. "Don't fall asleep," said a voice in Lizzie's head. "Open your eyes! Open your eyes!" She could barely lift her eyelids, and through half-closed eyes, she saw Pierre walking away. "Pick yourself up and get into that lift," said the voice. It sounds like Sarah's voice, thought Lizzie. With this thought, using all her strength, Lizzie tried to slowly haul herself up, using the handrail to help her. But she just couldn't get to her feet and fell back down again. "Come on, you can do it," said the voice encouragingly. Determined now to make her escape, Lizzie dragged herself slowly towards the lift. It felt like she would never reach it. Then Lizzie heard a noise. "He must be coming back," she thought. The fear spread through her body. She could feel herself tingling inside. Lizzie felt a burst of energy, and with one final attempt, she crawled to the lift on all fours like a baby. She looked up and saw the keypad. Then it dawned on her. She needed the code to get the lift to work. She desperately tried to remember the code, but her mind was still slow and foggy. "What is it? What is it?" she thought. Lizzie was in such a state of panic, even the simplest of thoughts were a struggle. She knew it was only a matter of time before Pierre would be back. She began to cry, having lost all hope of ever escaping. Then it came to her. "Of course," she thought. "It's the same number as my birthday." Hope restored, she pulled herself up and began slowly tapping in the numbers on the keypad. She could barely see the numbers in the darkness. 2909. The lift door opened and Lizzie stumbled across the threshold. Then suddenly Pierre appeared. He was holding a metal object. Lizzie couldn't see very well, but it looked like an axe. Lizzie gasped and hit the down button with her fist. The lift burst into action. The doors closed and the lift began to descend. Lizzie knew she had to get help. She took her phone from her bag, which was still over one shoulder and across her body. She looked at the screen. She saw 5 missed calls. From Pierre. Pierre? Thought Lizzie. Oh no. In a split second, Lizzie realised the truth. She had been at the top of the Eiffel Tower with a complete stranger. Had her worst nightmare come true? Was he an axe murderer? She pressed callback, the only thing she could think of. But then the lift stopped with a jolt. Lizzie fell to the ground. There was a moment of complete silence. Then the lift began to ascend, making an eerie screeching sound of metal on metal as it made its way back up to the top. Lizzie was about to be reunited with that evil man. Lizzie heard the phone connect. "Answer the phone! Answer the phone!" cried Lizzie frantically. The lift had almost reached the top. Lizzie knew she was running out of time. "Hello?" said a voice in a French accent. "Is that Lizzie?" Yes, whispered Lizzie. "Help me, please." Where are you?" said Pierre. "I'm at the top of the Eiffel Tower. He's going to kill me. Please, help me." The lift came to a sudden halt and the door slid open. Standing there was a dark figure of a man, dressed in a black onesie jumpsuit. On his face, he was wearing a child's plastic Pinocchio mask, with 2 black eyes, a childlike grin, and a long protruding nose. Lizzie was absolutely terrified. She froze to the spot. The black figure stepped into the lift, picked her up, and stepped back out onto the viewing balcony. "What's he going to do?" thought Lizzie. "Is he going to throw me over the top?" Lizzie clung to him with all her might. She was determined she was not going to die this way. If she was going over, she was taking Pinocchio with her. Then Lizzie saw the metal object she had seen him carrying before. It was definitely an axe, and it was lying on the ground. Perhaps it wasn't his plan to throw her off the top of the Eiffel Tower after all. Lizzie felt her whole body come back to life as the adrenaline began to kick in. She was fearless. With that, she took hold of Pinocchio's nose and pulled the mask off Pierre's face. The elastic snapped and struck his cheek. It stunned him for a second. Then she stuck the long, hard plastic nose in his eye. Pierre dropped her and cried with pain as he staggered back from the balcony. He reached for the axe that was lying on the ground. He could hardly see as the blood from his eye blurred his vision. Then, without a second thought, before Pierre could pick up the axe, Lizzie grabbed his hand and twisted it behind his back. He squealed like a pig and doubled over in pain. Then Lizzie slammed the heel of her shoe into the base of his spine. These stilettos have come in handy after all, she thought. Pierre was writhing on the floor in pain. Lizzie looked round for a large object to knock him out with. But then she stopped. She could hear the sound of the lift activating. It was going down. Oh no, thought Lizzie. What am I going to do now? How am I going to escape? She ran over to the lift and thumped her hand on the keypad in desperation. The lift began to come back up. She looked over at Pierre, who was beginning to recover. He stood up. His face was covered in blood, and he was stumbling towards her with the axe in his hand. Lizzie screamed. She was absolutely petrified. Suddenly, the lift doors opened, and there stood 2 armed police officers. They sprang out of the lift onto the platform. Lizzie couldn't believe her eyes. One of the officers pulled her to the ground, while the other one pointed his gun at Pierre. "It's all over," shouted the officer. "Put the axe down." Pierre hesitated. He looked behind him into the black sky. His only escape now was over the balcony. He turned back to the officer, reluctantly dropped the axe, and collapsed to the ground with exhaustion. "Are you okay?" said the officer to Lizzie. Yes, I think so," said Lizzie, and she promptly fainted. The following morning, Lizzie woke up in hospital. She squinted at the bright light as the sunlight streamed through the window. She could just make out a man standing at the side of her bed, dressed in a white doctor's coat. "Bon matin, Lizzie," he said. "Good morning," said Lizzie, still feeling a little groggy from the effects of the previous night. "How are you feeling today?" Okay, said Lizzie, not quite sure what was happening. Then it all came flooding back to her. What happened to Pierre? He wanted to kill me." "Don't worry about him. He's in police custody. Apparently, the police have been looking for him for the past 5 years. You are very lucky to be alive." Lizzie noticed the doctor's French accent and wondered if it was the real Pierre. She looked at him. He had thick, dark, wavy hair and brown eyes. It must be, she thought. "I got your call last night. You sounded like you were in serious trouble. So I called the police." "You are Pierre," said Lizzie. "Thank you so much for helping me. I can't thank you enough." Pierre smiled. "The police would like to question you," said Pierre. "Perhaps this afternoon, when you are feeling better?" Lizzie nodded. "Yes, no problem," she said. "Okay, get some rest now," said Pierre. As Pierre walked towards the door, Lizzie felt a sinking feeling. Would she ever be able to tell Pierre what actually happened? Was he even interested? Lizzie watched him leave the room and close the door behind him. "Idiot," she said to herself. "You absolute idiot! Why didn't you call him back?" Lizzie sighed and rested back on her pillow. Just as she was closing her eyes, the door opened. It was Pierre. We could go for a drink later if you like. When you are discharged? My shift ends at 7. As long as there are no more emergencies, he smiled. Lizzie felt butterflies in her stomach. She had a feeling this was going to be the beginning of something special. "Sure," she said, trying to be cool. "See you later, Al." Lizzie just stopped herself before saying alligator. "In a while, crocodile," said Pierre. He smiled and closed the door. Lizzie punched the air. She had never been so happy. If you want to receive more stories, please don't forget to subscribe.